Welcome everybody to the Fantasy Formula Live, and we're here ahead of the sprint race for the Qatar Grand Prix. And guys, this is in Vegas, but I'm glad to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to be back, Adam. I think it was a fun weekend for all three of us. Terry, how are you feeling?
Yeah, no, I've recovered from my jet lag and my almost 24 hours of non-stop travelling. Back in familiar surroundings in my shed. Not quite as swanky as last week, is it? But we give it our best shot.
We were looking pretty sharp in the SiriusXM studios, and then every day I keep seeing new podcasts that have been launched in the same seats as us. Like Christian Horner was in Terry's seat, Ruth Buscombe was in my seat at one point. Like it was such a really cool studio to be a part of. So hopefully they'll invite us back next year. We can do more of our shows in front of everyone. Should we dive into free practice 1 data and what we learned from sprint qualifying, and then we'll start setting the table for how our teams look this week?
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. All right. So free practice was interesting because despite a whole week of me talking about how Ferrari's going to be on the back foot, they immediately came out and proved me wrong with a strong FP1 showing. Other than that, the big thing that stood out to me was a lot of folks finding the gravel instead of some of the track limits issues that afflicted everyone last year. So just trying to find the limits of the circuit, understanding how the tires can live up, particularly around those 3 right-handers in sector 3. Did anything stand out to either of you in free practice 1?
Not really. I missed it, to be honest. So I only really have the screen to go off here, but I wasn't surprised to see Lando and Oscar inside the top 3. But I think, like you, Adam, Ferrari was the biggest surprise. I thought they'd be competitive-ish, but I wasn't expecting to see both drivers inside the top 4 on the first running session of the weekend. Terry, what's your initial takeaway from Ferrari? Because I know there was some skepticism heading into this weekend that they weren't going to be as good as they might have been in races prior.
I just feel they've turned the corner with their development. We know they're still trying that floor. I think Charles had it for FP1 again yesterday, the one that Carlos tried and took off. So they're clearly doing some stuff for next year as well. But they seem to have a lot more understanding, I'll say, of the car recently. Is probably the biggest thing in terms of getting it in that setup window, which has been their struggle. Probably if you look at that middle part of the season when they really struggled, I think since their updates have come on board, they've got a good idea. I was surprised to see them as quick as they were. We were all sort of leaning towards this McLaren sort of domination and Ferrari almost sort of holding on, but we didn't see that in free practice or indeed the sort of qualified itself. But I think what got me was the normal. We see the Red Bulls are down, but then that's normal with Friday practice, turn down engines, etc., etc. We're used to seeing it, so a lot of that is still going on in free practice, especially now. Interestingly, George Russell is running an older engine than what he ran in Las Vegas, so clearly teams are mixing and matching to make sure they don't accrue any penalties in the final 2 races and just kind of digging out what they've got left that's in working order. I think is probably the best way to describe it for some of the teams.
That George Russell possible engine penalty gives me a bit of a worry, Terry, about my team this weekend, but we'll cover that off in a little bit. I suppose the big surprise to me is that Mercedes don't really have a fight with anyone in the constructors. So I'm sure if they're kind of just playing for points in the top teams.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a matter of can they just get one car into the podium positions or even 2 like they did last week. George Russell's looking good to start the week across all sessions. Lewis a little bit disappointed with how things went yesterday. So that it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays for the Mercedes constructor, because clearly George is standing out. But when you take the package of the 2 of them together for the constructor, it's starting to look a little more pessimistic. Couple quick things to cover off before we go into the sprint qualifying data. Remember to send us your lineup through the fantasy formula based on the FanAmp app. We'll be sure to cover it on the show today. And while you're there, answer our contest question. Which 3X and 2X combination will score the most fantasy points this weekend? I know, Rob, like a lot of you, have this decision to make. It's one of the biggest weekends of the year in F1 fantasy. So make sure you let us know which way you're heading. We got a few folks in the chat this morning. Mike, thanks so much for joining us from the West Coast. I know it is bright and early out there, so thanks for coming by. Morning, Allie, Vigo, and Aaron. Looks like we got a lot of folks in the chat already, so that's great. So, Rob, as we move over to sprint qualifying, then the power of the McLarens really started to show. 2 in the top 3. Did anything else stand out to you from sprint qualifying?
I think the biggest surprise to me was George Russell after a pretty uneventful free practice session. And he, along with some data I saw, I guess his recent form, along with some data I saw on all three sectors on the track, encouraged me to likely roll with him this weekend unless we have any last minute news. But I was very much surprised he was the second fastest driver in all three sprint qualifying sessions. And I take that with some confidence heading into the weekend, that even though the Ferrari race pace may not be, also is slightly more competitive than Mercedes, I think after what we saw last week that we probably shouldn't put as much stock in those simulations. And Tom Pophanman, who we've had on the show before, did mention to me, which I overlooked, that come Sunday night, when the Grand Prix is, the temperatures will be in the mid-teens, mid to high teens. So a good sign for Mercedes and how they usually perform in those conditions.
Definitely good news, especially moving this race from October in the extreme heats last year to what will be December 1st tomorrow. I think that's going to bode really well. Also, resurfacing the track should help with some of that tire wear a little bit. And so you won't see crazy things like the stint maximum that we saw in 2023 as well. One thing that stood out to me, if you look at the bottom of the top 10, Gasly and Hülkenberg looking strong again. So that Al Pink that they started bringing out for the last few races of the year has been running really fast. Gasly with some really bad luck in the Grand Prix. He had that hole blown in his side pod that ended his day early. But in the case of Hülkenberg, 4 top 10 finishes in his last 5 races. He seems to be the real deal for Haas.
Yeah, I'm really liking the form of Hulk. He had his best non-sprint result of the season last week in Las Vegas, and I definitely think he's got the momentum to continue into this weekend. I think him and Gasly are kind of lumped into a similar boat where they'll probably qualify quite high, but I do think the ceiling of theirs is much higher than most of the other C tiers. So I think if you're weighing up someone like Zhou, because he's going to start so far back, versus Gasly and Hülkenberg, I think Zhou's probably got a higher floor, but I definitely think Gasly and Hülkenberg have a bit more scoring potential under their belt this weekend. Terry, kind of what's your read on the midfield leaders in the top 10 that we're seeing on screen here?
I think we pretty much, like you said, we've got the Alpine, we've got Haas. I think Liam Lawson performed well in the sprint qualifying yesterday. I think, like you said earlier, in terms of the Mercedes, it seems to be the W15 lives the cold, doesn't it? So, colder the track, the more that's going to suit them. But I feel, again, we've got Aston Martin just sort of hovering around there, not really doing a lot. Seems to be the story of their season, if I'm honest, where they just seem to be around about that sort of 9th, 10th without being spectacular in any way whatsoever. Hülkenberg seems well in form, as he has been for most of the year, but then Magnussen tends to, as Adam Metallo, score more fantasy points on the Sunday. So I think it's tough. I think that order is pretty much set now for what it is. We haven't seen many updates to the cars this weekend at all. There are only tweaks. I know that Alpine had a front wing, and then I think it was Stake had something to do with the front as well, but nothing of any significance, I should say. So they're using packages which they've already brought to tracks as well. So there's nothing new on the cars really from that point of view.
Just quickly on the kind of technical questions you might be able to assist with. Mike's asked around the age of the McLaren engines, and then I think Ali's asked around obviously an older engine that George is taking for this weekend. Is that, do you think, going to be problems for either of those teams?
I don't think they're problems in the sense we've been in this engine freeze for so long. Their reliability is pretty good, let's be honest about it. And if you had said a couple of years ago we were going to go through the season with 4 or 5 engines, most people would have just laughed at you and gone, no way, because we were getting through almost sort of double that. In terms of the age of them, it's hard to tell which ones they put in, because obviously you got that pool of 5 and they don't tell you how many races each one's been used for. So average guess you're talking about sort of 7, 8 races, I'd say, on average, for the age of the engines getting this far in the season. The only thing it might do, they might have to turn them down at some point. That's probably the only risk when you run an older engine. There might be something that goes on it later that has to be managed. Lifting and coasting, for example, is probably a big thing. And like I say, just having to turn it down. But I think in the colder climate, I'll be more worried if we were doing it at the same time as we were doing it last year with that heat, if I'm honest, than what I'm currently seeing out on track with the temperatures that we're seeing around Qatar at the moment. So I think, and also they can swap them. So what they might have had in their engine for free practice might not be the one they qualified in for the actual sprint qualifying. they can switch you in now as well. Obviously, under the Part 3 rules.
So it'll be interesting to see if that plays out. We haven't mentioned the Piastri consecutive lap streak yet this week, so we'll just keep saying it until something either manifests or we're proven wrong. So we'll keep an eye out to see if that engine age plays a factor in this weekend. One other thing I want to talk about too, Rob had mentioned the midfield with respect to those sprint qualifying results. This is a very low overtake course. We went from Las Vegas last week, which is the overtake capital of the 2023 and 2024 calendar in dry conditions. But then this circuit, with all of the high tire wear, those really impactful corners, particularly in sector 3, it's really hard to overtake. You basically just have that main straight. And again, with all of that tire wear, you have to complete the overtake or else you're going to be killing your tire. So I think what the qualifying order is going to very closely resemble what we see when the drivers cross the checkered flag this week. So those midfield drivers that qualify high have a little bit more faith in. Whereas if you have a driver with a shock Q1 exit, I'm not as confident they're going to march up the field like we saw with Hamilton last week.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I do think it's going to be a bit of a stab in the dark for the midfield drivers as per usual. So with the exception of, I think, Colapinto starting at the back in the pit lane for the sprint race, I'm not really sure kind of where the smart money is for this week.
And so Matt asked this in the chat, and I'm sure so many people are too. He's undecided about Ferrari versus Mercedes. Maybe we can run through some of the data that I've seen this week, because I very boldly called Mercedes a much better play than Ferrari to start the week, but now everything has come all the way back to favor Ferrari. So maybe we can walk through some of the things that have made me change my mind on it. You can see here, this is the updated betting lines for the Grand Prix. Previously, to start the week, you had both McLarens, both Mercedes, and Verstappen ahead of either Ferrari driver. And you can see here that this performance has turned things a little bit. Russell's still at the top, but now Charles Leclerc's gotten ahead of both Hamilton and Verstappen. Sainz now ahead of Hamilton, who had some quotes after qualifying yesterday to say that maybe he's just not fast anymore. Maybe his single lap pace has totally fallen off for the year. So that doesn't bode well for Hamilton the rest of the weekend. So that's put Ferrari a little bit ahead of them. And then if we move over to those two posts on X from Formula Data Analysis, he had some really good follow-up on that Ferrari pace. Can you blow up the first picture with the telemetry? So how Ferrari have done it is that they've figured out a way to channel more downforce in those 3 consecutive right-handers that are circled in green. Those are 12, 13, and 14. So that red line for Leclerc, that's his speed, a little bit faster than Lando, carried through that sector 3, and that's how Ferrari is able to come all the way back. And then on that green box on the third little row there on the bottom, he's able to lift less, so he's on the throttle more during those turns in sector 3. So I think that's something Ferrari didn't quite have for them last year, either something they fixed with the setup like Terry mentioned, or the cooler temperatures, or the resurfaced track, but whatever it is, it's brought Ferrari back into the mix. And when you move over to the next tab for the long run data, these P-pod shapes show Ferrari has some of the best long run pace across multiple tire ages, which bodes well for them. Managing their tires had been a problem about 2 years ago for Ferrari, and they seem to have solved it. And this is a great proof of that, that work that the Ferrari team have done. So all of this data taken together leads me to believe that the Ferrari constructor is now back on par, maybe a little bit ahead of Mercedes, because with Mercedes, you have Russell up here, Hamilton down here, and you're trying to figure out where that average is out. Whereas Ferrari, you're going to have 2 drivers sitting around P4 to P6, a little bit of a safer upside for them.
That's reassuring for my team this week, Adam. So ended up sticking with Ferrari constructor, but decided to mix it up on the driver lineup. And I think Ferrari have just shown, even though maybe underachieved a little bit in Las Vegas, that they have been one of the more consistent constructors across the entire season. So I think there's probably a lot of people holding them for this weekend just because of that, despite their result in Las Vegas.
The other thing that's interesting too, Rob, is I see you have the practice debrief up. And when we spoke with Lawrence Barretto last week, he gave us a little insight on how some of these simulations are created. Here you can see just the results of spring qualifying, Mercedes without that edge over Ferrari and Red Bull. But then when we start moving down into Grand Prix qualifying, then you see Ferrari are starting to make a comeback here. Lawrence says in this article, it's mostly because both Charles and Carlos had moments in their flying lap in sprint qualifying that held them back. But if you're to correct for that, if they're able to have an optimal lap, they should be able to pull ahead of Mercedes. And then on a low overtake circuit, that will probably play into a better result for Ferrari. And then moving on down, the simulation pace for the race matches what we saw from Formula Data Analysis earlier. So both of them confirming Ferrari have the better long run pace than Mercedes, and even a little bit better than McLaren. So good news for Ferrari this week. I think everything is starting to come together to give me this sense that Ferrari is looking better. And remember, these simulations have an element of history in them too, that they bias a little bit toward previous year's performance, of which Ferrari was pretty bad. So the fact that they're able to overcome all of that and still be this high in the simulation pace, it bodes well for them this weekend.
Question for both of you, and Terry, I'll start with you. I know 2/100ths is nothing in Formula One. But do you think that Ferrari can make and mount somewhat of a challenge to McLaren? And if we're looking at it from a fantasy perspective, is Leclerc even remotely in the conversation up against someone like Oscar Piastri on the 3X chip? Or is it Lando and Oscar all the way?
I think they can, but I think qualifying is going to be key. I think track position here is key. We got, like Adam says, we've got one DRS zone, and that's all we do have. So overtaking, I don't imagine being amazingly high at all. So I do think qualifying is going to be the route to it. If somehow McLaren lock out that front row and keep the Ferraris behind them, that gives them lots of options. Obviously, in terms of tactics, we know that they're obviously going for the constructors now. There's going to be much more of a team papaya rather than papaya rules. I would imagine this weekend, judging on obviously the Drivers' Championship being wrapped up now. So I think that to do so, they need to get ahead of the McLaren in qualifying to be able to mount a challenge, or at least split the McLarens. I think is probably their best bets to mounting something, because, like you say, that 200 is nothing. That's a corner somewhere. That's like
not even
absolutely nothing. You know, a lifting coast somewhere, touch the gravel. So I think it's going to be really, really close to this afternoon in terms of qualifying. And bear in mind, they've now got the data as well from the sprint. They can actually tweak their setups when they go into qualifying. So that's going to be an interesting factor this year as well. We don't have that part for me anymore. So you can make the changes based on what you're going to learn from the sprint race as well.
For me, I agree with Terry that I think Ferrari could split the McLarens, but it really depends on qualifying here, because it's so hard to overtake that if you're a little bit quicker, you still have to pull off the overtake with that dirty air, with only one DRS zone, with McLaren coming back on you in all of those corners. I think it's going to be difficult for Ferrari. So I still lean toward Piastri, but for those of you that can't afford triple McLaren, I would probably actually make the jump to either Leclerc or Russell. Russell's still enough of a differential when we look at the elite data and how many teams in the top 500 still run a Mercedes driver. It's enough of a differential this late in the year where it might be worth a punt on George. There you can see he's run less than either Ferrari driver and Piastri. So it really depends on what you're trying to do this week. If you want a high upside driver with a little less popularity, George could be worth a shout.
I do think these numbers will change once the deadline passes, because you can see here the likes of Oscar Piastri dropped off right before the Vegas deadline. I think that will very much pick up again. He'll be much closer to 50%, I would hazard a guess. And I think Charles will definitely come down. I'm curious to see if George's percentage ownership increases as a differential. Like you say, he's the reason why I opted for him over someone like Carlos Sainz, just because I do think there won't be too many that have a double points multiplier on him this weekend. But I am curious to see kind of how Ferrari do stack up, because I've run Sainz for what feels like 7 or 8 weeks in a row now, and he's had mixed results. So hopefully Russell can put in a few good stints this weekend and deliver something. If I'm not asking for the world, just a nice 25 to 30 points would be nice.
I want it for you, Rob. And a little optimism too. I read earlier this week that of all the drivers on the grid since the summer break, the highest average qualifying position belongs to George Russell. So very consistent form. If he can replicate it in Grand Prix qualifying later today on a low overtake circuit, I think 30 points is doable for you.
I think so. Should we go through a couple of questions? Because I think there's been a few
Yeah.
more come through
Yes,
recently.
let's do it.
Take us away, guys.
Okay, just got through all of the good morning questions. Hulk, Magnussen, or Gasly when we talk about midfield drivers. For me, I think Hulkenberg's form lately, it's so consistent that I've got to go with him, particularly on a low overtake circuit. So he can afford to qualify P8, P9, and he's not going to plummet too much unless something terrible happens. But I'd be interested to see if the two of you disagree, because Rob, you have Gasly this week.
Yeah, no, I think if I could afford Hulkenberg, I would. I just think he's more reliable. The Renault engine, I wouldn't say I'm concerned about. And I chose Gasly for the differential. He's looked great in qualifying the last few weeks. And all he needs is string together one good race, as we saw in Brazil, to even get close to a good 20 points on a sprint weekend for a midfield driver. So I think that's definitely within the realms of conversation. But I think I like Hulkenberg. What about you, Terry?
Yeah, I'd go Hulkenberg if I could afford it. Yeah, pure and simple. I think a lot of us are struggling with budget and making meaningful changes this time of the season. But I think if I could afford it, I would definitely pick Hulkenberg over Gasly. But I don't think Gasly is a poor shout if you can't afford Hulkenberg.
Terry, there's a question earlier in the chat about the nature of Gasly's retirement in Las Vegas, that it was a mechanical failure. But if I'm understanding it right, there was so much speed going into that straight that it popped a hole in his side pod, and that destabilized the whole power unit. And so it's a pretty fluky thing, not some sort of reliability issue with the Alpine. Is that how you saw it too?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those freaks that happens. It hit whatever the air and everything, blew that hole in, and just created that tunnel, which then damaged the engine. Looking at it again, I don't think you could probably try and recreate it again if you wanted to. I think it's just one of those purely, combination of the airflow, car he's following, what was going on at the time, and just everything. So I wouldn't put it down to a serious problem. I think it's just one of those unlucky things that just happened and transpired for him.
Good. Moving on in the questions in the chat, Vicky Jakey wants to know Leclerc and Joe versus Russell and Gasly. I would say, so they marked Leclerc and Joe as the safe pick and Russell and Gasly as the risky pick. But I think the tables have turned this week with Russell looking so strong on a low overtake circuit, Gasly looking as fast as that Alpine's looked all year. I think the risky pick might be the safer one.
Yeah. I'd kind of agree. I think risky in the sense that you've got, as you say, Terry, a driver in Gasly that's just retired from a race, and Russell, Adam, that qualifying stat's obviously really encouraging for Russell owners. I think someone else mentioned before Frano asked, is he due for a disappointing weekend after such a good recent run? I don't really buy into that, because you look at someone like Oscar, who's completed every lap, looked sensational this season, not scored below 10 points in any race. And I think Russell's kind of in that same category. Like he's as good as he is until he isn't. And I don't think trying to premeditate DNFs is how you should be playing fantasy. So I'm inclined to go with Russell Gasly. But Zhou, one thing I will say is Zhou's starting, or most likely going to start at the back again. So if there are a few DNFs like we saw last year, I think he'll be able to pick up a few points.
Rob, you had mentioned premeditating DNFs being something we don't want to get in the business of, because they're so impactful, so disappointing. And this is a common theme in our community survey of what can we change for this game next year. Definitely bringing down the penalty for DNFs and disqualifications is a huge common theme through the responses we've gotten so far. If you haven't taken that survey yet, we've posted the link below. I think it's pinned in the chat. Please make sure you do it. The survey will be open until Abu Dhabi, and then we'll turn our results over to our friends at F1 Fantasy, and hopefully we can start making some changes for next year. They've already introduced an element of live scoring with the projected points, so they're starting to move in the direction of one of the biggest complaints that our community has shared. There you see the survey now. So it only takes, 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how detailed you want to get with some of your long form answers. And you have a chance to win another 5th Gear Garms gift card. So you can win one from today's contest, one from the survey. And before you know it, you're going to have a closet full of 5th Gear Garms. Fantastic. All right. Mike wants to confirm Hulk over K-Mag. I think we're all thumbs up over that.
Yep.
I'll throw the simulations up in Fantasy Tools for people to look at while we go through a few more questions in the chat, if that works for you guys.
Let's do it. Mexis is down 150 points with the 3X chip left, needs a differential. What would we recommend if you really want to take a home run swing this weekend?
I think like Rob said with Russell. Would Russell be that? Potentially looking at that, obviously 500 data from the beginning of the week. I mean, of course, there's a danger that everyone moves to the differential, then it's no longer differential, which is risky, isn't it? But
yeah, I'd say Russell for me. If we're looking at top drivers, I think Norris, Piastri are going to be the two most popular. I think if I had the money to get to Oscar, I'd own him over Russell. But I do think George, I think Leclerc, looking at his points on the screen here, 30 points. It's really not that much off Oscar. It's, an overtake here, a position gained there. So if not Russell, or I'd probably go Leclerc if we're looking at drivers to pair with Lando.
I'm trying to think of crazy stuff. Like, how do you make up 150 points in a week? Something like
DNFs.
McLaren. Yeah, definitely that. Something like a McLaren, Mercedes, Max Russell. Something that's like highly differential. You don't have the top two drivers by most standards, but if something happened with McLaren, then you can make up. But it's a huge putt. You're either going straight to the top or you're falling way off of first place. So it depends. It depends on where you want your confidence to be coming out of this week. You either want to go all the way up toward first or completely fall off. Sort of depends on your preference. All right, moving on. Vigo wants to know Tsunoda or Lawson.
I'd go Lawson.
Tell me why.
More to prove.
That's fair.
More to prove. I just think that, we're now in that final stage where you look at all the stuff that's going on with Red Bull and V-Carb and driver seats, and Yuki's talking up about how he's disappointed he's not in the Red Bull picture. You've then got Liam, who hasn't technically got a contract for next year as far as we know, even though we think that he's guaranteed one of the seats. We just don't know which one or where. So I think Liam's got a lot to prove still, and just talking from his radio messages and just the way he is in the car, he feels like someone who's out to prove a point and determined to take his chance. So I would go that, but then it could all crash and burn, couldn't it?
The one thing I'll say in favor of Tsunoda, just for this race over Lawson, is that he has a pretty low sprint qualifying position, and I think we've learnt the last few sprint races this season, at least, that if you're a midfield driver qualifying right at the back, the overtakes and positions gained sometimes actually outscore those drivers that place quite highly. So again, Terry, I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag for tomorrow for the Grand Prix, but I think in the sprint race, I'm giving Tsunoda the edge just because he's starting much further back than Liam, who made it through to Q3.
I think for both of them, it's going to be very close. If I had Tsunoda or Lawson money, I might just punt. And if you're close to Gasly, go to Gasly, or go with maybe Colapinto or a Sauber, and then take that extra money and put it toward the top of your lineup. Like, neither of those drivers stand out so much that I have a strong opinion on them. All right. Wow, we've got a lot of questions in the chat. Let's fire through. Ewan's in the chat. Morning, Ewan. Or I guess good afternoon for you. Theo is only 0.1 million off of Rob's team. Should he switch out Ferrari for Mercedes to keep Gasly instead of Zhou?
I don't know if I'd do that, to be honest. I feel like Mercedes, we know, as you talked about, Hamilton's just a bit of a unknown commodity at the moment. I mean, I don't think he'll drive through the field like he did last week. So I think I'm liking the reliability of Ferrari overall. And Zhou's nice from the back too, isn't he?
Out of context, Rob, we'll clip that for later. It also, when you look at the sims on the screen here for the constructors, the Ferrari team is expected to do a fair bit better than Mercedes, whereas these midfield drivers, it's a matter of just a few points between them. So I think for that reason, I agree with Rob. Aaron has an interesting question. He's coming to us from South Africa. Hi, Aaron. He has his Limitless chip, and he's looking for the top team for Limitless this week.
Ooh.
So McLaren, Ferrari stand out as constructors. And then I'm just going to shoot from the hip on this one. Norris, Piastri, Russell, Verstappen, and then sort of take a shot at a Ferrari. Leclerc, maybe?
Leclerc, yeah.
Any disagreements from the two of you?
Max might be my only one, just because I feel Max is a bit in party mood.
Might still be hungover from Vegas. Who would you put in instead of Max, Harry?
Yeah, let's hope they don't breathalyze Max after his weekend in Vegas. But I'm not too sure on the Max one. But then I'm not sure what I'll swap Max out with.
I'd throw in Perez as an ultra differential. I know he had a DNF here last year, and most people don't love the idea of him. But if you're really coming from behind, this guy starting from the pit lane, right? That's probably five overtakes at least, 5 positions gained at least in the sprint. I think if you're playing Limitless this late in the season, you're probably a little bit behind. So I'd be kind of throwing my luck against the wall and hoping that Perez luck sticks for just one race.
Good thinking, Rob. Yeah, especially this late in the season with Limitless, you're probably going for something off the beaten path, and doesn't get any more off the beaten path than Perez. Albon or Bottas is one of the bottom drivers. For me, it's gotta be Valtteri. Albon DNF 4 in the last 5 races, 3 DNFs in a row. Hasn't happened in several years since Lance Stroll did it last to start the year. I just simply can't trust both Williams on my team because I have Colapinto.
Terry, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I'll probably say the same. Like we said, I'm still concerned about Williams and spare parts as well if something does happen to him. So as much as that's been talked about and sort of muted about, they're clearly struggling with it. So I think having 2 Williams is a risky strategy given their current, predicament in terms of parts and where they are, and also just what parts they're using. We're hearing that Franco's going to the old suspension and stuff like that happening. So yeah, I think running 1 because you probably got to because your budget is fine. Running 2, I think, is just a little too risky for me.
I'm inclined to agree. I think 1 Williams is enough stress for one weekend, and their DNF luck has not been the strong suit lately. So Franco's enough. I think kind of on the topic of back markers, Felix asked Bottas or Zhou. Adam, do you have a strong point of view on either of those drivers?
Not really. I mean, we look at Zhou. I'm just looking at his last 6 races here. 7, 6, 6, 7, 9, 5. As your last driver, I think that's A-okay. Valtteri hasn't cleared 3 points in that same stint. You're talking about 3 to 5 points per week, so it's marginal, but Zhou has been arguably the more consistent driver.
All aboard the Joe train then.
If anyone didn't notice, Valtteri now has Christmas cards of the famous Peach picture. So if you haven't gotten your Valtteri Christmas cards this year, I think all of your loved ones will really appreciate them. Piastri or Russell from Gezelig K. If you can afford Piastri, I would go Piastri, but appreciate that not everyone can.
Yeah.
Ooh, Michael wants to know final fix with Perez. Let's see. I would say if he's flying in the sprint today and then qualifies low again for the Grand Prix, maybe final fix Perez in, but you've got to really want it because then you'd be subbing out like a Piastri for him. And do you really think Perez on a low overtake circuit can do Piastri's worth of damage?
He can do damage.
Radio Paddock says to hit the like button. I agree, Radio Paddock. Hit the like button. We've got 1 race left, and we want to have a lot of momentum heading into Abu Dhabi.
Should we get through some lineups? I realize there's, we're just past the halfway mark in the show.
Let's do it.
We haven't even gone through any of them.
All right, we've got Brian again. This is Eau Rouge. Oh, we don't see 130 ARG this week. I wonder what he's up to. So this is Norris Leclerc. That's a perfectly good lineup. I would probably pull for Oscar if you can afford it, which I think you can with that extra budget. Maybe slide that 2x onto Oscar. What do you guys think?
I like that too, Adam.
Yeah, definitely.
That would be an almost identical team to the one you had in Brazil, Terry, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, let's hope for a better result.
Ooh, Joe sending 4 deep to us this week. My eyes go straight to the triple McLarens on the right. Oh man, triple McLaren with Hulkenberg, that third team. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
would go team 3.
Because
Same
yeah,
for me.
Hulkenberg over Sonoda on the last 2, absolutely.
And you're picking up the triple McLaren and the Ferrari in there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of hitting all the right bases with the budget available. So team 3 for me.
Yeah, team 3 and cross your fingers for Franco.
We never all agree, Joe. Take the third team and run.
yeah, hit save quick.
All right. Let's see. This is a very similar team to earlier. I think if you take that 1.7 million extra, yeah, I think you can slide that over on onto Piastri. Interesting that the 2X is on Leclerc. Maybe you're hoping for a differential, some chaos at the top with the 2 McLarens. If you're trying to make a move, this is definitely a differential. Or if you want to play it safe, I'd throw that 2X on Norris, bring in Piastri, and then ride triple McLaren.
Yeah.
Jealous of that budget that you can afford Hulkenberg with it.
Me too. Almost the same team. Two teams in a row. It is the same team.
But a little extra budget too. Yeah, splash that cash around. Don't let 2.8 million sit on the table.
Wow.
Yeah, put that into Joe over Bottas even. I think that's if you can, or some other midfielder.
Yeah, Joe's only 8.6. Yeah, so I think you can go for that.
There we go. All right, it is time for Mike. That team on the right stands out to me again. Triple McLaren and Hulk.
That's K-Mag. Sorry, I should zoom in a bit more.
Oh, I got to get my cheaters out. I would switch Mag to... Okay, so this is a question that Mike had been asking us in the chat. If you can afford Magnussen, do you go with him over Hulk?
Where did he qualify? He went out in Q2, didn't he?
Yeah. So I think the question is, do you think Hulk is going to lose some positions in this race? K-Mag with absolutely nothing to race for will just go all out, gain a few positions. But then what does that mean for the Grand Prix?
I mean, he's had some good sprint results this year, to be honest. Miami, the only kind of blemish on his record, 17 in China. I'm just looking at the history there. 16 in Austria, 9 in Austin, 14 in Brazil. So I don't think K-Mag's got enough attention. And as you said, Terry, he came back last weekend after another rest. So maybe something to be hopeful about. I think for me personally, I'll take the team on the left because I like Sonoda and then Joe starting at the very back. But I think you're splitting hairs over both. Yeah,
the F1 Fantasy Tool Sims have Magnussen 4.6 ahead of Hulkenberg. So they're seeing a little something in terms of position gained. So it's not a terrible shout, Mike, if you want to keep Mag there.
I think I'm inclined to go the team on the right if we're sticking with the theme of triple McLaren and the Ferrari constructor guys.
Yeah, agreed. Obviously I like Gasly over Albon or Zhou, but then you're talking about doubling the difference between Piastri and Sainz, which is significant.
Yeah, I think your 2X is much more valuable with your McLaren drivers than what they bringing Carlos in.
Nope. Sorry, I'll zoom out so we can see the names of who submitted the teams.
Jeremy. So current is Lando and Leclerc, and then it's triple McLaren Sonoda or triple McLaren Gasly. Triple McLaren Gasly on the end there.
Yeah, I would go Gasly in that one.
My Alpine take is gonna hit eventually, guys.
It did, mate. It hit in Brazil.
But I need 2 or 3 in a row just so it feels like sustained, and not a lucky thing.
No, they just need to have wet races every weekend, and they'll bring that speedboat to the track.
Yeah. So Mercedes is going to start calling the tracks when they get to them.
Lay out the ice cubes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're in agreement. We like Jeremy's team on the right to roll a transfer into Abu Dhabi, have 3 free transfers to play around in the last race.
Yeah. I prefer Gasly over Yuki.
Nice.
All right. Let's muscle through these last three, then we can reveal our lineups. Number one constructor for this weekend is McLaren. And I think we have some others with Mercedes and Ferrari. I think that might be the question about number two constructor too. Or maybe some folks are going with Mercedes and Ferrari. Lower budget there and then double McLaren on the top.
I am.
Here we go. Terry with the lineup reveal right there.
Yeah, just drop it and go.
Terry with the mic drop. All right, Arkun with triple Ferrari heading into this week. And then Lando Russell, Hulkenberg, or Lando Piastri and Zhou. This is, I think, the first interesting question we've had in a while. No 3x boost, so the Piastri differential isn't that big. So Russell Hulkenberg versus Piastri Zhou.
I quite fancy the middle one.
I'm starting to warm up to the middle one myself.
I still think Piastri is like a nice asset to kind of cover off people who are using him on the 3x. And you'd really have to have a bad outcome for Oscar for it to backfire entirely. So I think kind of from where your position is, Adam, like Oscar seems like a perfectly fine asset to own. What was your logic going for him, just to kind of preserve your position at the moment?
Yes, exactly. And what I wanted to have was a juxtaposition between your team and my team for our head-to-head battle. Like if you have a lead, try to cover off with the safest possible thing. All the evidence points to triple McLaren being better.
Agreed.
But then for a team with a lower budget, then you want to start taking some shots. And that's how the winners last year came to be, is that they started taking shots in the last few weeks. So I think that's where option one would come in.
True.
Good. 2 lineups left. What do we got here?
Rory,
Lando, and Russell. Okay, so this is Gasly versus Zhou. Oh, okay. So Lando and Zhou versus Piastri and Gasly. Oh, give me Lando.
Yeah. 1.4. Like, what could you do with 1.4? You can't really get to anyone else, can you, from Zhou? I think
the chat's lamented this a little bit.
Yeah.
The distance between Zhou and anybody else is high.
Yeah.
Definitely not worth it to tuck into Albon at this point.
That's true. We learnt that in where was it when we went Zhou over Albon a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We talked you out live on stream to go off Albon, and it worked out, Adam.
I am eternally grateful for the chat. You saved me a huge headache. Look at this team. Breakfast of champs.
Wow.
Oh, sorry. Went off screen there.
My goodness. This is a team that I'd roll out if I needed to make some moves. You have that super strong midfield, Hulkenberg, Gasly, Lawson, and then 2x on Verstappen. So you're hoping for something crazy to happen at the top. You've used all of your budget, so you probably have a little bit more budget than some of the others in your league.
Yeah, I feel like it's the one thing against it is that's, as you say, Adam, lower overtake track. It's not really the lineup that I think would thrive. Are we maybe better off going for a George Russell, Carlos Sainz? Is there enough kind of wiggle room, even if you've got 2 lower premiums? And then usually max and strong midfield is the same budget as a Lando Oscar or Lando George team. So the safer lineups would be what Rob and I have been touting earlier in the show. This would be the high differential. You're in second place down, 50 to 75 points, and you just got to go bananas to try to sneak past somebody.
Yeah,
so true.
All right.
Okay.
We have just 15 minutes left. Rob, do you want to do a quick lineup reveal? We've been hinting at our lineups throughout the show.
Sorry, I'm kind of scrapping. Have you guys posted yours? I'll bring yours right up afterwards as well.
I posted mine.
Let me post one more while you're talking.
Sorry, I'll just throw this up here. So yeah, this is my team for this week. Kind of the logic here is twofold. I couldn't get to Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris unless I had Mercedes Ferrari, which was essentially kind of the same conundrum you were dealing with in Brazil, Terry. And I wanted to, if I'm going for Lando on the 3X, I want to make sure that the McLaren constructor is in there somewhere. I think the decision to go for or stick with Ferrari, but keep George Russell was the whole discussion point we had earlier around whether Lewis can really make anything of this weekend. I'm a little conservative. I think Ferrari will, as you guys mentioned, they'll probably be around at best 3rd to 6th. I'd say 4th to 6th is kind of where I see them. But I think George is probably the lone wolf for the Silver Arrows. So, even though I don't expect him to finish second, I think it's Lando's and Oscar's to lose. I think George is a nice differential at his price point. So I'm very content with going with this lineup for this weekend.
That's a perfectly good team, Rob. I agree with everything that you said there, is that with Mercedes, it really hinges on, can Hamilton channel some good qualifying form so that he can be in a good position in the Grand Prix. He's been really pessimistic about his single lap pace, which brings down the overall value of the Mercedes constructor, but Russell's looking great. So worth a shout.
Okay. I'll put yours on the screen here, Adam.
This is an easy one. Just turtled into triple McLaren. Nothing crazy at all. Going into my comfort zone.
Bonkers.
And then Terry, I'm just bringing yours up now. If it's up and ready to go, just locked in. Alrighty. I roll back for the last couple of weeks, right?
I went with Oscar. I couldn't afford like a triple McLaren, so I went with a second premium driver and banking on George's performance and maybe Lewis coming up a bit as well. Purely budget driven. If nothing else, there's not a lot of manoeuvring with this, to be honest.
It's tough because I feel like it's afflicted many of us that kind of got burnt or weren't quite on the same budget. I feel like, and nothing wrong. I think it's kudos to everyone that's been fortunate and had enough budget. Like Adam, you for example, you've among many others have thankfully just had that window where you can pivot between Oscar and Leclerc every other week at the very least. Whereas I think Terry, you and I are kind of stuck, kind of rotating the second premium driver, but at the expense of the second constructor or other back markers. So very envious, Adam, that you've been able to have that extra flexibility for the second half of the season.
It's been very fortunate indeed. And this is actually a good opportunity for a shameless plug for our Abu Dhabi preview, because we've booked Andrew, aka Leapers One, aka Leaps Frog, the #1 team in the world with a budget over 140 million. So we want to pick his brain on how the heck do you get that much budget gain throughout the course of the season, because that can really set the table for how we handle 2025. Gentlemen, let's run through a bunch of questions in the chat.
I saw one about a triple 3X chip and use it this week. Yeah, definitely use it this week. Don't wait till next week. Yeah, whatever you're doing, wherever I saw that one in there. I can't remember who put it in there, but yeah, you use it now.
Derpy cake. Yes, definitely use it this week.
Yeah.
Even if it is on, Sainz and Russell, if you could afford that, I think, which Derpy Cake suggesting, who do you put the 3X on, guys, between Carlos and George?
Oh,
George.
I agree.
All right, we got just 2 minutes left for the contest. Make sure if you haven't entered it already that you do. Jeremy wants to know Gasly or Hülkenberg. Two guys that we've been very partial to throughout the course of the show. The Sims have them separated by 0.2 points.
I think that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Flip of a coin. Yeah, I think that's probably the most accurate description. I don't think you go either wrong with any.
I agree that it's a coin flip, but if you twist my arm, give me Hülkenberg. But it's close.
Yeah, I'd probably go the same, Adam. I'd go with Hulk.
2x on Russell or Leclerc on a team that needs a differential. Ooh, the key there is on a team that needs a differential. You'd have to hope that Ferrari race pace that the Sims had on the top of the stack works out for Leclerc. He can inch his way up in the Grand Prix, sneak some points in a driver of the day. I think that's the route for him being the differential. Russell, you'd have to hope a lot of people turn to triple McLaren and nobody believes in Russell's recent form. And then you just take advantage of a sprint and Grand Prix podium. So I think that's the path to each of them being that differential. I would say Russell has the higher upside. Leclerc is the least, probably the less popular of the two this weekend. So it depends on which side of the scale you want to push on more. All right, Rob, do you want to fire up the contest?
Yeah, sorry, I just lost my mark. Give me a sec to get the names in, and we
Sure,
can,
that's fine. Derpy Cake ended up running the same team as you, Rob.
Oh, nice.
So I'm sure you wish them both lots of luck.
Absolutely.
All right, let's hit it. Ooh, Brian wins. The manager of Eau Rouge and 130 ARG. Congratulations. We'll be in touch for your 5th year Garms gift card, and their Black Friday sale will be running for a few more days, so you can take advantage of some great sales from them as well. Are there any other questions in the chat we haven't covered off yet? I'm scrolling quickly, but if there's anything we missed from you that are still here, feel free to throw it at the top and we'll cover it off.
I saw one from Alligator. If you've got Norris second driver, Piastri or Russell, if that means you upgrade Joe to Gasly.
I feel like it's triple McLaren versus Norris, Russell, and a better midfield driver.
Yeah.
It's very close. It's a matter of maybe 4 or 5 points. So then it's just looking at your league. What of the people ahead of you? What do you think they're going to run this week? And do you need to run something different?
Away from it, yeah.
But in terms of the points, that all plays out to be about fair.
I think Norris Piastri for me. I can't look past that if you can afford that and the McLaren constructor. I can't find. I think we've done well to cover off most of the questions this week.
I hope I've done a good enough job backpedaling on my Mercedes over Ferrari take from earlier in the week. They've proven me wrong, and hopefully I've had a chance to recover and convince you all to run Ferrari this week too. Gentlemen, any last thoughts before we head into the sprint race?
Maybe let's do a 1, 2, 3 predictions, and then maybe we can wrap things up.
Ooh.
By that silence, I think you want me to go first? Okay. Grand Prix 1, 2, 3. I'm going to say Lando, George, Oscar. I think George splits the McLarens.
I'm going to go Lando, Oscar, and then I think Max for the Grand Prix. I think his hangover's gone by then.
Okay. I'm going to be a bit different here, and probably to the ire of everyone using the 3X on Lando, myself included, but I'm going to put the money on Oscar to win. Lando in second, George in third. And I think Oscar has kind of been biting at the heels a little bit of Lando lately, and everyone on F1 TV was saying like he's due a bounce back race. He's due I guess a performance a weekend where he can really take it to Lando, and this is his track. He had his best result of the season here last year, won the sprint driver of the day. I almost felt half compelled, if I could have afforded it, to put the 3X on Oscar this weekend and the 2X on Lando as a high differential. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Lando's definitely delivered throughout so far.
It's a good shout, Rob. You know, Terry mentioned earlier there's going to be no more papaya rules, so there's nothing for Lando to race for. So that opens the door. As long as they're not running into each other, Oscar could run away with it.
For sure.
And then also, as we look at the other leagues around too, the global league, I imagine Andrew's using his 3X chip this week. He has to avoid disaster to stay out of the clutches of Raheem in second place. So that's going to be very interesting. Just going to keep your fingers and toes crossed for that. And then in the F1 Live League, all three of the top runners, Laurel, Lawrence, Chris McCarthy, all still to use their 3X chip. They're probably using it this week. And then where that 3X and 2X lie is going to determine which of our friends from F1 TV wins the whole thing. So a lot of big leagues hanging in the balance.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, that is a wrap for Qatar. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back in just a few days with Andrew at the top of the Global League to answer all of your questions ahead of the final race of the season in Abu Dhabi. Until then, enjoy the race.
See you soon.